Lives are at stake.
I was sitting in a dimly lit van. A contract lay open on my lap. Across from me, a man in a rabbit mask watched in silence, the hollow eyes of his mask fixed on me. "Please review the terms carefully," he said, his voice calm, emotionless. I scanned the document. The conditions were few, but chilling. The company is not responsible for your life. All risks are assumed by the player. No communication devices allowed. I hesitated. What kind of game is this? But I had already come too far to back out now. "Fine," I muttered, signing my name on the dotted line. The man nodded slowly. "Welcome to the game." Suddenly, a thick yellow gas filled the van. I coughed, my lungs burning. My vision blurred as the world around me dissolved into darkness. 3 days earlier? My name is Jake. I'm 23 years old, and this was the worst day of my life. I sat in the doctor's office, staring blankly at the stack of medical papers on his desk. The doctor, an older man with a solemn expression, finally spoke the words I had been dreading. "Your sister has cancer. It's aggressive, and her condition is worsening. Surgery is her only chance." My throat tightened. "How much?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer wouldn't be good. The doctor sighed, his expression softening. "She has insurance, but it won't cover everything. The surgery alone will cost $200,000. I forced myself to nod. "I'll get the money," I said, though I had no idea how. Leaving the office, I headed to my sister's hospital room. She was asleep, pale and fragile, her breathing shallow. I couldn't wake her. What could I possibly say? The doctor said she already knew about her condition. But how do you even begin to talk about death with someone you love? I stepped outside, hoping the cool night air would help me think clearly. It didn't. The weight of it all pressed down harder than ever. I sat on the bench outside the hospital, chain-smoking cigarette after cigarette. My mind was numb, my chest tight with a mix of stress and the harsh burn of nicotine. Suddenly, a man approached and sat beside me. He was dressed in a flawless black suit, the kind that looked expensive but understated. His face was calm, too calm, almost unnatural. "You seem troubled. Perhaps someone close to you is suffering?" he said softly, his voice smooth and calculated. I exhaled a plume of smoke and nodded, barely meeting his gaze. "Yeah, my sister. She's dying." "I'm sorry to hear that. Can she be saved?" I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, but the surgery costs more money than I can get." The man leaned in slightly, his tone growing quieter, almost conspiratorial. "Money? Such a cruel thing, isn't it? Deciding who lives and who dies." I clenched my teeth, nodding slowly. "Do you love her?" I swallowed hard. Feeling the sting of tears I refused to shed. "Of course I do. She practically raised me. Our parents died in a car accident when I was 10. She gave up everything for me. Her personal life, her dreams. She sacrificed it all so I could have a better life." The man nodded thoughtfully, as if carefully absorbing every word. "You must be feeling so powerless right now." I nodded again, staring blankly at the ground as the cigarette burned down to the filter in my trembling fingers. The man extended a business card, placing it gently in my hand. White, plain, black text, no logo. "We can help you," he said in that same emotionless tone. "If you're willing to risk everything, even your life." I stared at the card, my brow furrowing. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice tense. The man didn't answer. Instead, he rose from the bench, adjusted his suit jacket, and turned to leave, walking calmly toward the exit of the hospital grounds. I watched him go, my heart pounding. What the hell does that even mean? The question echoed in my mind, over and over. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket, making me flinch. I pulled it out. It was my sister calling. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the green button. But for some reason, I just couldn't answer. I declined the call. And then, as guilt twisted in my chest, I rushed back into the hospital. I had to see her. I had to speak to her face to face. The hospital room was filled with an unsettling quiet. There she was, lying on the bed, pale and fragile, her face drained of color. When I entered, she looked up and gave me a small, forced smile. She was trying so hard to hide her pain, but I could see right through it. "Hey Jake, how are you?" she asked softly, as if nothing was wrong. I felt a lump rise in my throat as I sat gently on the edge of her bed. "Jess," I whispered, meeting her tired eyes. "I'm gonna find the money. I swear, I'll make this right." Her trembling fingers reached out and brushed my hair back from my face. She smiled again, softer this time, but with sadness clinging to the corners of her lips. Don't do this to yourself, Jake, she whispered. Please, stop worrying about me. Focus on your own life. We both know we can't raise that kind of money. No, I snapped, gripping her hand tightly. I'm not giving up on you. Just hold on a little longer. I'll figure this out, I promise. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she didn't speak. She just squeezed my hand back, holding on as if afraid to let go. That evening, I sat in silence, staring at the small, unassuming business card between my fingers. Plain white, just a number. But I knew there was nothing ordinary about it. My chest tightened. I have no choice. Taking a deep breath, I dialed the number. The line rang once, twice. Are you ready to play? A deep, emotionless voice asked. My throat felt dry. I gripped the phone tighter. Yes. Then wait. A vehicle will arrive at your home in 1 hour. Be prepared. Click. The call ended. I sat there for a long time, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. That's how I ended up in the back of that van, trusting my life to people I didn't know, for a chance I wasn't sure I'd survive. I woke up in a strange, windowless room. It felt about the size of a standard bedroom, but there was something unnerving about it. A deep red light filled the entire space, casting long shadows and making the walls feel as though they were closing in. The room was bare. Just a steel-framed bed with a thin mattress, a small sink, a metal locker, a mirror, and a tiny sealed window on the wall. The window seemed to connect my room to the adjacent one, probably for communication, or passing items between the rooms. I approached the mirror, and that's when I noticed it. A collar, a metal collar tightly fastened around my neck, blinking with a small red light. What the hell? I muttered, immediately clawing at it. It didn't budge, completely locked in place. My head throbbed with pain, probably a side effect of the gas they used back in the van. Then I noticed something else. I was wearing a tight yellow jumpsuit. The sleeves were so long they covered most of my arms, but when I raised my hand to my face, I saw it. A sleek digital bracelet on my wrist. Suddenly, it buzzed softly and lit up. Good morning, participant number 008. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Another message followed. 7:30 breakfast. The game will begin shortly after. The game? My heart began to race. The messages on my wristband disappeared, replaced by a large digital clock. 7:25. Okay, enough time to freshen up, I thought. I washed my face in the small metal sink, splashing cold water on my skin, hoping it would clear my head. The entire situation still felt surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. Exactly at 7:30, a low, vibrating hum filled the entire building. The deep, mechanical sound echoed through the walls, rumbling in my chest. Then, click. The door to my room unlocked with a loud metallic clang. I took a deep breath, hesitated for a moment, then slowly stepped out, scanning my surroundings. There were so many rooms, hundreds, all identical. And from each one, people were emerging, nervous, confused, terrified. Different ages, backgrounds, expressions. Some whispered, others stayed completely silent, but the fear in the air was palpable. Suddenly, a harsh, commanding voice boomed from speakers mounted along the corridor ceiling. Players, remain calm, move to the right side of your room and proceed down the hallway. There were murmurs of confusion, but most people obeyed, falling into line. We formed 2 parallel rows, moving forward in tense silence. The sound of synchronized footsteps echoed through the endless corridor. After about 2 minutes, the hallway expanded. We entered a massive hall, resembling an oversized school cafeteria. Dozens of long tables, each seating 4 people. Trays of food were already set: eggs, toast, apples, and bottled water. People hesitated, but slowly began taking seats, though the tension only seemed to grow heavier. I scanned the room carefully, studying the faces around me. Men, women, young, old. All of them looked tense, confused. Some were silently eating, others glanced around with the same cautious curiosity I felt. As I continued observing, I estimated there were about 100 participants here. I was one of the last to sit down, choosing a table where only a few seats remained. At my table sat a young woman with short, blonde hair, nervously tugging at the edge of her jumpsuit. An elderly man with silver hair and kind eyes. A broad-shouldered man in his 30s who remained silent. We were all starving. For a while, no one spoke. The only sounds were the clinking of utensils and quiet chewing. Finally, the elderly man set down his water bottle and broke the silence. "So," he began gently, his voice calm but heavy. "What brought you here? What happened in your life that made you join this game?" We exchanged uncomfortable glances. He continued, "My reason is simple, I suppose. I'm old, I won't be around much longer. But this, it's a chance. If I can win, the money will go to my children and my grandchildren. They need it more than I ever will." The girl shifted uncomfortably, and I had no idea what to say either. "I'm drowning in debt. If I don't pay it back, I won't make it out alive," the muscular man muttered, his gaze fixed on his plate. Probably mixed up with some dangerous people, I thought. Definitely someone to keep an eye on. I felt the need to speak too, as if sharing would ease the tension. "My sister, she's sick. I need the money for her surgery," I said quietly. Silence lingered between us. Finally, the young woman who had stayed silent until now spoke up, her voice soft but direct. "Grandpa, you spoke about this game like you know more than we do. Am I right?" The old man paused. His eyes scanned each of us carefully before he finally nodded. "Yes, I knew someone who went through it. He told me about the games, about the prize money, but you'll learn the details soon enough." The young woman frowned, her voice more urgent now. "Are the games dangerous? I mean, life-threatening?" The old man took a slow sip from his water bottle and bit into his apple. "Of course, the more people who die, the more you earn." The tension in the room was suffocating. The old man's words lingered, heavier than the silence that followed. Everyone understood this wouldn't be easy money, but hearing it spoken aloud made the danger feel real. I scanned the faces around me. The young woman had gone pale. The large man clenched his fists, his jaw tight. The old man, he just kept eating his apple. Calm, too calm. Suddenly, a piercing alarm echoed through the hall. Bright red lights filled the room, pulsing ominously. The doors at the far end of the cafeteria opened. 5 figures entered. They wore identical black jumpsuits, their faces completely concealed behind oversized animal masks. Cutesy, childish, yet deeply disturbing. Each carried an automatic rifle, held with cold precision. At the front stood a figure in a white jumpsuit, unarmed, but he was clearly the one in charge. His mask, like the others, was oversized and expressionless. A rabbit. Raising his hand, the alarm ceased. "The first round is about to begin." His voice was calm but commanding, as though he wasn't announcing the rules. He was delivering a sentence. "Form teams of 4. Once ready, proceed down the staircase behind me." Since we had already spoken a bit, it made sense to stay together as a team. Without a word, we rose from the table and followed the rest of the crowd toward the designated hallway. The corridor was narrow, with cold steel walls pressing in on both sides. The sound of synchronized footsteps echoed eerily, making the space feel even more claustrophobic. After a few minutes, the hallway opened into a large hall with towering ceilings. A figure stood near the far wall, another person in a black jumpsuit with the same animal mask as before. "Extend your left hand." The voice was cold, mechanical. We obeyed. Moving methodically, he scanned each of our wristbands with a small device. When he finished, he paused and asked, "Who is the leader of your team?" We exchanged glances. I was about to speak when the old man took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "I'll be the captain." The masked figure said nothing. He simply handed the old man a small metallic tag engraved with the number 18. At that moment, the elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss. We exchanged glances and stepped inside in silence. The doors closed with a heavy metallic thud, sealing us off from the hall behind. I turned my attention to the control panel. There were 10 buttons, but no numbers. Instead, each button displayed a simple animal silhouette: a fox, an owl, a bear. But only one button was illuminated, at the very bottom of the panel, glowing red with the image of a squirrel. I looked up. Above the elevator doors, the same glowing red squirrel symbol had appeared. The lowest level, maybe? I thought. The elevator began descending, smooth but slow, almost too slow. A full minute passed. How far underground are we? But that question felt less important than the one gnawing at my mind. What's waiting for us down there? Finally, the elevator jolted to a stop. The doors slid open with a mechanical hum. A vast, sterile corridor stretched out before us. The walls were pristine white, and the dim overhead lights reflected off the polished floors. The doors were spaced far apart, an unsettling distance, which could only mean one thing: The rooms behind them were massive. Each door bore a bold black number. "We need 18, the old man reminded us, gripping the metallic tag tightly in his hand. We moved forward in tense silence, scanning the corridor for our number. Stepping through the door marked 18, we found ourselves in a massive, dimly lit space. It looked like the remnants of an old, abandoned factory. Towering steel beams stretched overhead, and piles of wooden panels, broken crates, and scattered planks were strewn across the dusty concrete floor. The air felt stale, heavy with the scent of sawdust and rust. Suddenly, the room was bathed in a harsh red glow as the lights overhead flickered to life. A voice echoed from speakers above us, calm, cold, mechanical. "Attention participants. Rules for the first round. You have 5 minutes to hide. Use each teammate's strengths to your advantage. After the time expires, a team of 2 will enter. Their goal, to find you. If you're caught, you lose." The voice cut out, leaving only the low hum of the lights. "Everyone, listen carefully." The old man's voice cut through the tension, calm but commanding. We froze, turning to face him. "You need to understand something. If you get caught, you're dead." His eyes narrowed, voice absolute. "So we need to think carefully about who hides where." He glanced at the young woman, her ID clearly displayed on her neck. 014. "First, we'll hide her. She's small, light, harder to spot." Then he nodded toward the large man, 03, his number glowing on the collar. "You'll help her." 03 gave a grunt. "How?" "She'll stand on your shoulders. If we find a high spot, she'll be out of reach. That will give us an advantage." It made sense. We scanned the room quickly. In the far corner, a massive old machine towered above the floor. Above it, a ventilation shaft with a metal grate ran along the wall. "There," the old man said. "That's her spot." We hurried over. 03 climbed onto the machine first, gripping the edges for balance. 0114 carefully climbed onto his shoulders, wobbling slightly but holding on. It was just enough height. She reached up, fingers barely grazing the vent. With a tug, the grate shifted open with a soft metallic groan. Before climbing in, 014 paused, her wide, frightened eyes meeting mine for a brief second. Then the grate slid back into place with a soft click. "One down." "The hardest part will be hiding the big guy," the old man muttered, scanning the room. "Let's deal with that now." We spread out, searching for any potential hiding spots. That's when I noticed it. A massive, rusty furnace in the corner. Its heavy metal door had fallen off and was lying nearby, corroded but still intact. "What if we hide him in there?" I suggested, pointing toward it. "If he climbs inside and holds the door shut from the inside, it could work." The old man narrowed his eyes, inspecting the furnace carefully. "Not bad. Let's try it." 003 gave a curt nod, silently approaching the furnace. He crouched down, grunting as he squeezed his broad frame inside the narrow, rusted space. "The door," reminded the old man. Together we lifted the heavy metal door, struggling to position it against the opening. From inside, 03 extended his arms through the gaps and gripped the metal bars firmly, holding the door in place from within. "You good?" I asked, slightly breathless. "Yeah," came his muffled response. The old man double-checked the door's position, then wiped the dust off his hands against his jumpsuit. "Looks solid enough," he muttered, stepping back to inspect the hiding spot one last time. "Now we need to find a hiding spot," I whispered, scanning the room for anything useful. Suddenly, a sharp alarm blared through the space. The cold, mechanical voice returned. 1 minute remaining. Cold sweat ran down my back. "Damn it, 1 minute? Already?" I muttered under my breath, my pulse racing. The old man suddenly grabbed my wrist, his grip firm. "I know a good spot." "Follow me," he whispered. We hurried toward the entrance. Near the door stood a massive electrical panel, an old industrial breaker box with warning signs plastered across it. "We'll hide in there," the old man said with eerie confidence. I froze. "Are you crazy? That thing could kill us. It's high voltage." "Calm down," he replied, his voice steady. "Look closer. It's fake. A prop. There aren't even any wires inside." He pulled open the metal door, revealing nothing. The inside was hollow, no cables, no circuits, just an empty metal shell. "Hurry, get in," he insisted. We squeezed inside together, barely fitting, and shut the door from the inside. Just then, the red lighting flickered and shifted to a pale blue. A blaring siren echoed through the room. The game has begun. I looked down at my wrist. A countdown timer had appeared. 5 minutes. 5 minutes to be found, or not. The heavy steel door groaned open. 2 figures in black jumpsuits entered the room. No guns this time. They were holding wooden clubs, studded with nails. What the hell? These psychos, I thought, my fists clenching instinctively. They're planning to torment defenseless players with that? From the cramped electrical panel, I peered out through a narrow crack, heart pounding. They didn't speak. Instead, they exchanged a silent glance and began sweeping the room with unsettling precision. They weren't amateurs. Every movement was calculated. They searched places I wouldn't have even considered. Then I saw one of them raise his hand, pointing directly toward the ventilation shaft where 014 was hiding. The other spotted a long, rusted steel rod on the floor. He picked it up and extended it, using the metal to tap along the surface of the vent, slow, deliberate taps moving inch by inch. Please stay quiet, I pleaded internally, barely breathing. Suddenly, the sound changed. A dull, heavy thud echoed, like the rod had struck something soft inside. They paused, and then, without warning, began pounding on the vent, hard. Bang, bang, bang. The metallic clang echoed louder with each brutal strike. After a few seconds, a terrified scream tore through the room. 0114. Panicked, she began scrambling back toward the vent opening, but they kept hammering relentlessly, their strikes growing more aggressive. Her face, I still remember how she looked at us before we hit her there. The girl fell from the ventilation shaft. The drop was high, but she landed without serious injury. She scrambled to her feet, panic in her wide eyes, and bolted across the room, screaming for help. The 2 figures in black followed her, not rushing, just calmly closing the distance, confident she had nowhere left to run. I watched from our cramped hiding spot, my pulse thundering in my ears. And then it hit me. The old man, he planned this. He hit her first for a reason. She didn't know where we were hiding. If she got caught, she couldn't give us away. I clenched my fists, trembling as the 2 men cornered her. She pressed her back against the cold wall, sobbing uncontrollably. Her entire body shook. Run, don't give up, move! I screamed silently in my mind. The girl slumped to the floor, tears streaming down her face. The taller figure raised his studded club. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The first blow struck. A piercing, agonized scream filled the room. A second strike. Her voice cracked, the scream turning into a ragged, broken sob. A third. No sound, just the sickening crunch of flesh and bone. Tears blurred my vision. My entire body shook uncontrollably, and then I felt the old man lean closer, his whisper cold against my ear. If you don't want to be next, stop crying. I glanced at my wristband. 2 minutes. 2 damn minutes left of this nightmare. The 2 figures in black continued searching the area. It seemed like we were safe. They had moved far from our hiding spot, far from the old furnace where 003 was hiding. But then, a deafening crash shattered the silence. A sharp, metallic clang echoed through the room. I knew instantly what it was. The furnace door. He couldn't hold it any longer. The 2 masked men immediately turned toward the noise, their focus shifting. I couldn't see the furnace from my angle, but the sounds told the whole story. A scuffle broke out. Grunts, heavy footsteps, the scrape of metal on concrete. 003 was fighting back. He wasn't going down easily. Like us, he had heard the girl's final screams. Suddenly, a loud crash, something heavy, metal hitting the floor. He threw something at them, more yelling, the brutal sound of fists landing. Then, silence. Chilling. Who won? I stared through the gap, heart pounding, struggling to see. And then, one of the men in black stumbled into view. It was dragging his partner, who could barely stand. Both were covered in blood. But it wasn't theirs. It was 003's. The 2 figures in black silently exited the room, leaving nothing but suffocating silence behind. And then, a loud chime echoed through the space, signaling the end of the game. 5 minutes. The longest 5 minutes of my life. We cautiously stepped out of our hiding place, the air thick with tension. It felt like every breath weighed me down. The first thing we did was approach the girl. She lay crumpled on the cold concrete floor. Her hands were drenched in blood, fingers curled into tight fists. Her face, her entire head was coated in crimson. I realized she must have been holding her head, trying to shield herself as they rained blows down on her skull. I felt sick. We exchanged a silent glance. The old man gave my shoulder a soft pat. His expression was grim but calm, like he had seen worse. Then we made our way toward the furnace. Every step felt heavier, and when we reached it, blood, a massive pool of it, seeping across the floor. 03 lay twisted at the base of the furnace, his body mangled beyond recognition. Chunks of flesh were missing, torn away by the spiked clubs. His head, it was unrecognizable, just pulp. I turned away, bile rising in my throat, and then a weak, broken voice. "Help me, please." I froze. His chest was moving, was still alive. "He's alive. We can..." The old man gripped my wrist, stopping me mid-step. "You can't help him." His voice was low, steady. "We need to leave." We stepped out of the blood-soaked room into the corridor. The air felt heavy, suffocating. There we saw some of the other surviving players. A few looked unharmed, shaken but physically intact. Others were far worse. One young man, drenched in blood, was being helped along by two others. He looked barely conscious, his face pale, his body limp. Did they try to finish him off, but ran out of time? I wondered grimly, my stomach twisting at the thought. Suddenly, the cold, mechanical voice echoed again from the overhead speakers. "Winners of the first round, proceed to the main hall." I turned to the old man. "Is that where they gave us the room numbers?" He shook his head. "No, I think it means the dining hall." We made our way back through the endless, sterile corridors until we reached the place where we'd eaten earlier. What we saw there sent a chill down my spine. The survivors stood in small, scattered groups. Most were pale, silent, and visibly shaken. No one spoke. No one could, except for one group. In the center of the room, 4 players stood together, calm, relaxed. They were quietly chatting, even laughing among themselves, as if nothing had happened. They must have had an easy round, I thought bitterly. Or maybe there's something we don't know. About 30 minutes later, they returned. 10 figures in black jumpsuits marched into the hall, each armed with a rifle slung across their chest. Leading them, just like before, was the man in the white suit and mask. He stepped forward into the center of the room. His voice echoed calmly across the hall, devoid of emotion. "You will now be escorted to the showers. Afterward, you will receive fresh clothing and be returned to your rooms for rest." Suddenly, a voice broke through the silence. "What are you doing to us?" It was an older woman near the back. Her voice trembled with desperation. She stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "You're killing people. This is madness. I want to go home, please, just let me go." Her plea sparked murmurs throughout the crowd. Another man stepped forward, his face pale and furious. "She's right. We didn't sign up for this. Everyone in my group is dead. You butchered them." The murmurs grew louder. Tension thickened. Suddenly, bang! One of the masked guards raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The deafening sound silenced the room instantly. "Everyone, remain where you are." The man in white spoke again, his voice calm but commanding. After a brief pause, he continued. "Tomorrow morning, there will be a vote." He scanned the room, his masked gaze sweeping over the shaken players. "You will have the chance to stop the game." The evening passed in silence. I sat alone in my room, which felt more like a prison cell than anything else. The dim overhead light cast pale reflections on the bare walls. Everything was quiet, too quiet. I perched on the edge of the bed, staring blankly ahead, waiting for morning. Tomorrow this nightmare will end. We'll be able to stop this madness. I kept repeating those words to myself, but deep down, something told me it wouldn't be that simple. To be continued. If you liked the story and want a sequel, give it a like and subscribe to the channel.